Hello, my name is Lynn Mead, and I want to talk about how I incorporate diversity, equity, and inclusion into the public speaking classroom. I have several objectives. My first is to share several ways that I've worked DEI into the public speaking classroom, but the second is to challenge you to think of DEI as a journey, not as one class or one lecture you give, but rather how it's something that you can put throughout your assignments, throughout your lectures, and throughout your examples. In my class, it all begins with a handshake. So, of course, this is before COVID. All of my classes started with teaching students how to give a handshake, the differences in different cultures and handshakes. And we basically did some work with demystifying networking. So we talked about how to engage in a conversation. What are some prompts to do if you're trying to make a new friend, if you're trying to greet somebody in another class? I use varied examples. My students in public speaking watch videos to get an idea of how public speaking is used in various contexts and to look at people who are good public speakers. I've been very intentional in making sure that the videos they watch include a variety of voices, a variety of races, a variety of viewpoints. The bottom picture is of Anna. After watching The Danger of a Single Story the night before, Anna came to me and thanked me. It was the first time that I had ever seen anyone that looked like me in any of my classroom assignments. How do I find these sorts of speeches? I have learned that one of my greatest friends has been online forums, and when I'm looking for examples, I actually go in and just say, hey, I'm looking for examples. What examples do you have of certain speeches or certain speech types? And they will respond. And what I found is I have teachers from all over the globe that are responding. I have teachers here in the United States that are using a variety of different speeches, and I'm watching speeches I would never watch before that represent viewpoints I would never thought of before. And I'm using those to show to my students in class. Another thing that I do is incorporate different sorts of diversity things in my discussions. So in public speaking, we talk about what type of language is appropriate for what audience and when. So we have a discussion about what do you call people and why does it matter? And I allow them to explore all of the different names and the varieties and why it matters and why context matters and what's the impact of these sorts of things. I also have a day where we discuss simply the prompt, what do you consider to be unethical in a speech? I don't tell them. They tell me what's unethical in a speech. And I find that so much more powerful than me pouring my knowledge into them discussing it and coming to the conclusions that I had for them anyway, but they own that information. And we also talk in these discussions, be willing to make it right if you get it wrong. I tell them I have made all the mistakes so they don't have to. And I give them examples where I, as a public speaker, used the wrong name for a people group, or I spoke poorly. And I tell them how I went back and made that right so that they realize that DEI doesn't mean we're perfect, that DEI means that we're empathetic and we find ways to make it right. I do a lot of student-led discussions, especially on these topics, because I think it's important that we teach our students how to think about these complex issues, not what to think about these complex issues. So I have my students, they have to go and they have to research speech codes on campus. They have to research freedom of speech on campus. They have to research hate speech. And then they sit in groups and they share with one another what they learned from their articles. The other people in the group have to listen and take notes. So everyone in the group shares what they've learned and everybody's taking notes on the others. And then those individuals from a group have to get up, go to a different group and teach the other group what they learned from their classmates. Another way I incorporate DEI in my classes is when we talk about fallacies. I do a backward approach to fallacies in the fact that I teach them what fallacies are and I actually allow them to write fallacies. And in doing so, what it does is it makes them so much better at detecting them in the long run. So I give them the heated debate that we have in Northwest Arkansas about bathroom bills, and in Arkansas about bathroom bills. So they have to research the actual debate to the bathroom bills, and then they get in groups and they say, what would be a fallacy that somebody might come up with on this issue? And then I bring in the famous robocall that went out through the state, and we look at this one, and then everything they've learned about fallacies from writing fallacies and from studying fallacies and teaching others about fallacies, then they have to identify which fallacies happen in this. And the big picture we talk about is how poor arguments muddy the debate when we're trying to think about these important issues. I teach intercultural communication in Dublin, Ireland, so I have a lot of pictures from my own travels. This is one of the pictures that I took of the doors. And so it says, what can we learn about the Irish from the color of their doors? And so the lecture is actually on how to make a good cover slide. So this is an example of how to create a good cover slide. But then, of course, they want to know about the doors. They want to know what it means. That leads us into a discussion about culture, cultural values, why this represents something about the culture. It also gives me a nice bridge to talk about study abroad. I also teach them how to make their own slides, their own presentation slides. And in doing so, I assign them the topic of researching a spring festival or a winter festival. I have a list of them in different cultures. And so they have to research that culture. Then they have to make a slide presentation to another group. They interview somebody, a student on campus, typically from another culture. What I love about this picture is I want you to look at their faces. They are engaged, they are interested, they are learning things. My students take what they learn from that interview and they actually create a presentation based on that. They create a seminar for business professionals that would train them to conduct business in another country. They use the interview, they do research, they apply the intercultural dimensions that they learn in many of their classes, they study the food, they study the manners, they have to find a prop of some sort, and then they educate the rest of the class. But ultimately, I believe that the best DEI thing that I can do for my students is help them to make a friend. Because I believe that friendship and connection, learning to listen, be willing to talk and be heard is the best teacher of all. So when they are engaging with students from other cultures in their class, outside of class, when they are engaging with students that are from different parts of the country or different races, and they are learning to listen empathetically and they are learning to make friends, that's going to teach them more than I could. In summary, diversity, equity, and inclusion does not have to be a single class. It does not have to be a single lecture. It can be incorporated into your class. I incorporated it into my class in terms of activities, discussion, examples, homework, and major assignments. The Association of American Colleges and Universities consider diversity, equity, and inclusion. They consider study abroad as a high impact practice. And I encourage you to consider how you can do these in your class as well.